even plants as an incarnation, they have a consciousness. And we see James, you know, taking very, a lot of people would consider extreme measures to not kill anything, eating fruits that fall on the ground as a way to prevent any kind of violence, just to maintain pure ahimsa. But I'm wondering if you can speak to it.
So in other words, the question is, how do we reconcile the way we live now on this planet?
Sure, I guess.
With, because I want to see exactly where your question comes from.
I think that's it in a more general sense. I meant specifically around violence towards other beings. Like, even it seems like if you pick a flower or a plant to eat, that's stopping that plant's incarnation, their incarnation, their ability to be self-aware, their ability to liberate themselves, and the incarnation of their inner.
Sure. It's a very good question and poignant one, and often comes in gatherings, often comes. Are we prepared to look at it from, forgive me for saying, how it really is, rather than how we perceive it from our human perspective? Because there's a big difference, see? And it is very helpful to see that human perspective is unique, of course, and very important. And we need to do everything we can in our power to find a way to harmonious coexistence with all creatures. Absolutely all creatures. I totally with you on that. But if we are to understand how this whole thing functions, then one of the most radical realization is that everything, absolutely everything that comes into existence live at the cost of something else that also came into existence. But don't just take this statement for granted. I want you to look into it. If you study cosmology, you will see that how everything is related in cosmos, in greater cosmos. The death of the star, when it bursts, it produces the stardust, which is a material for something else to come into being. So we could say that there is this act in motion. If you go down, if you zoom in from the totally opposite end of the spectrum and see the way that the biology works, that within our human organism there are many, many millions, billions of bacteria work, right? And they don't necessarily all practice ahimsa. Some bacteria are literally performing their role, and it's a very, very strict one, to defend good guys. And as soon as the bad guys come, bad guys are here, literally, those who are not part of this organism. Slay the damn guy. Cut him down. And the good guys are being like, immediately, you tired, man? It's like, okay, here's water, drink, take a rest, lean on my shoulder. I'll carry on. This is the working of the cells. Really, the brotherhood, sisterhood, This is the phenomenon of cancer, by the way, precisely because the cancer starts to grow within. It doesn't come from the outside. So when the cancerogenic cell is born, the next cell doesn't know it came from the outside because it didn't. So all it does is actually feeds that cell. It gives it energy, attention, love even. So what I'm inviting you to see here is that from human perspective, things are seen in the way that big, small, and kind of we're somewhere in the middle, and some say that precisely in the middle, between the biggest and the smallest. Things seem in a certain way. But in the grander scheme of events, everything has to live at the cost of something else. And there is no possibility to sustain life in any way. You have to be really careful in any way which it will not be lived at the cost of something that is also born into existence. Just look at the ecosystem of the forest. Everything lives at the expense of something else. Something eats something else. Right? Constantly. And very often, for that reason, certain things are being sacrificed. And within the domain of consciousness, it's a willing sacrifice. It's a willing sacrifice. I don't know if you're versed in scriptures, but there is in ancient Vedic scriptures, in very old Vedic scripture, in Rig Vedic hymns, and in the Puranas actually, in the Upanishads, there is these sayings that Brahman is the great devourer. The Absolute simply eats it all. And the whole creation is often viewed as this feast of Brahman, a feast of the Absolute. It's like the Absolute comes into being in order to savor itself through all its forms. It's a bit of a dramatic example, but a very, very revealing one. A very revealing one. This is helpful to understand that when we understand that everything lives at the cost of something else, we have to allow for that. However, and this is where I'm going to come back to that more human and humane perspective, before we eat anything, before we actually make it into our regiment, we need to understand who we are as creatures. Because the example with the forest, everyone performs the duty there in accord with their inherent nature as it meant to be, if you will. With human beings, not necessarily like that. With human being, there is a possibility introduced when consciousness is more enlivened. Hence, it has the power of exercising more diversity, which is obvious. And that diversity that consciousness entertains within the human organism, within the human embodiment, leads to that choice. Leads to that choice where not long ago there were these beliefs that we can alter processes in nature. Literally, we can alter. There were some ideas that, I mean, at the beginning of the 20th century, that almost climatic zones can be altered if you just, like you divert this river here and create a lake here, like. So what I'm trying to say here, what I'm trying to point out is that first we need to understand who we are, what are our requirements, physiologically even. Because when you said this example with like even when we pick the flower, and you cut some kind of flow of evolution, or some of my friends who would say, like if I talk to them about the benefits of vegetarianism, they say, well, you kill carrot, you pull it out of earth. Yes, but one could say that, you see, this is a choice. In carrot, consciousness reached the evolution where it has that carrothood, right? And how much that carrothood, or that carrotness, really, is being deprived when I kill and serve myself a cow or a lamb. So this is where the differences enters, and then whatever comes as our regiment, as what we choose to feed ourselves with, is then becomes a fertile field of discussion. Literally, a lot could be discussed, and very often when these discussions are being brought up, there is a lot of passion going on, a lot of disagreement going on. Why? Because we have different system of values. We all carry a different system of values. And we cannot enforce or force our values onto others, no matter how much we want or wish. Sometimes because the system of values of that to whom we wish to relate, what we know very well and sincerely believe is better, consciousness there is not yet ready to embrace these values. It's not willing to embrace these values. So it will only oppose. And we live in such time, which is known as that Iron Age, right? Or the Age of Ignorance, or the Age of Kali Yuga, which is characterized by diminishing of the laws of nature manifested on the obvious plane of existence, on the horizontal plane of existence. In other ages, these laws of nature are there vibrating at a higher frequency. And it is easier to act in accord with one's dharma. And moreover, one's own dharma does not violate the field of the other. This is the principle of coherence. It's actually a scientific principle that you can check that by scientific experiments, that the conductivity of a greater whole is not achieved through the diminishing, let's say, or through the sacrificing of its parts. But in Kali Yuga, it's almost impossible. You see? In Golden Age, we could say, there's no need for anything. There's no need for spiritual practice, no need for religion, no need for code of conduct. Because we all act and react in that and in accord with that. So that principle of Ahimsa there is naturally established on that level where still everything is being sacrificed in order to exist. Because as we said, even for the physiology of this body to be sustained, even if you become breatharian, still there's some processes. Still something has to live at the expense of something else. Even on the level of this physiology. After all, you inhale oxygen and you exhale what? Exactly. See? But you need that even as a breatharian, so there's no way out. But all this is like, if it's all on the level of the mind, then we all create these partitions, we all create this separation. If your question was much simpler, if your question was, what shall I eat? I would have told you, just eat what has less consciousness in it. In every human being, there is consciousness because there's this instrumentality, there's this nervous system. There's nervous system, we can vibrate, we can feel. But in animals who are evolved to a degree when there is a nervous system, it's the same thing. There's feeling. And it also in plants, but plants don't have nervous system. They don't have, even in the animal kingdom, there is a degree, see? They're more evolved animals. Evolved to a degree where they feel more, because there's more consciousness. Whenever there is more consciousness, there's more of everything. There's more possibility of feeling pain and pleasure. Hence, Ahimsa, when it was introduced, above all else, was that. It's non-violence, but it's also non-violence in terms of you have a duty to sustain your organism. Because if you try to practice non-violence at the expense of inflicting violence on your own organism, then Ahimsa is not being met. This is why I said we need to establish and know ourselves. Then what we then choose as our diet will become naturally in alignment with our evolution and hopefully in alignment with the overall field of Dharma. that sits with you.
It goes very deep, because it makes me just consider, you said that everything lives at the expense of another thing, that one pocket of information, that's a whole universe right there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The relationship.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Nothing can be added to it. But whatever is then is born within at the level of consciousness of each and every one where that consciousness rests. Because, as I said also within this exposition, to reflecting back onto what you brought, everything rests on the level of awareness, on the level of consciousness. Hence, values cannot be enforced. And what are my values are not necessarily your values. No matter how much I want these values to become yours, it will also be violation of Ahimsa if I disregard your unique predispositions, you see. But aside from that, yes, we live in time when I openly speak very critically about teachers who speak and preach non-duality, and they still admit to me they have not evolved to a state of unity, because in a state of unity, the last thing you want is to put anything or introduce anything into your diet that would be in any way harmful to a living creature. So there are different planes at which we can look upon it. And I'm not afraid that half the people will drop out from the flock who want to understand or relate to my message. And because to me this is more important, that we speak integrally from that. Because what we eat goes up making our cells, every cells of our body, and brain cells. So our food should now become more and more conscious and alive and filled with prana, rather than food that is dead. Dead, full stop. Because you cannot eat animal food unless it is first prana leaves it. It has to completely depart. So essentially, when Bernard Shaw said that meat eating, it's eating of corpses, it's not far from truth if you look at it from the Vedic and Yogic perspective. It's just that. It's just that. But again, we have to arrive to that conclusion. We have to have this revelation, inner revelation. And of course, proof of the pudding is in the eating. You know, those people who have tried. Sometimes there is necessity to, sometimes people have to come back to, let's say, animal-based diet, or reintroduce that in some severe cases, in some necessary cases. But what's important here is the overall understanding, so that everything is an offering. Absolutely everything is an offering. It's not just, I'm going to practice ahimsa and I'm just going to starve my body to whatever condition. That's not ahimsa.